Excellent. Well, thanks everyone for joining us today. I'd just like to start today by, oh, hang on a sec. Let me pull this up. Yeah, start today by acknowledging that I'm on Kaurna land today. Pay my respects to Kaurna elders, past, present, and emerging, and acknowledge that this was and always will be Aboriginal land. It was land that was not ceded, and it is a privilege to live and work and play on this beautiful country. And I'd like to extend that respect to the traditional owners of wherever you might be today, if that's not Kaurna land. And of course to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that we might have joining us today. Today we're going to be talking about the very exciting topic of national minimum data set data collection. I'm going to do a bit of an introduction about what the NMDS is, why data collection is important, and then we're going to go through some of the key elements of the NMDS and look at sort of how it's collected, how it's coded, and how it's recorded. If you would like to ask questions, so you've got a couple of options. You can either type them in the Q&A or the chat as we go. I am kind of managing things on my own today, so it might take me a second to kind of click, but we're not a huge group. So look, if you want to sort of raise your hand or just butt in with a question, then feel free. But hopefully we'll have a bit of time for sort of questions at the end too. So there's a few options there if you want to ask questions as we go through. Okay. So what we're going to talk about today is an overview of the national minimum data set. It's important to note that your organisation probably has data collection methods that are unique to each organisation. So I don't have knowledge of how your systems work or how your organisation collects this data in particular. So if you're looking for kind of specific questions about how this sort of happens within your service, then you need to sort of talk to a manager or someone within your service about that, because obviously different services have different systems about how this data is collected. Some collect it on a spreadsheet, some it happens automatically through their kind of client management system. So yeah, we won't be talking about that today, but yeah, so refer to, I guess, your own organisation's policies and procedures for that kind of information. And I'd just encourage you to share this seminar. We are recording today, so to share this with your colleagues. The peaks, all the drug and alcohol peaks in each state, so SANDAS included, and we have an equivalent in each state, got together a number of years ago in a concerted effort to kind of develop some real consistency around national minimum data set collection. And that's because it's not a very useful data set if it's not consistently recorded across the country. So that's kind of why we run these seminars in each state. There's also some online training available hosted on the Queensland Peaks website, QNADA, and I'll talk a little bit about that afterwards as well. So you can share this seminar with your colleagues, or you can share the online learning from Queensland, which people can just complete at their own pace. And a lot of what I'm going to talk today has come from the Queensland training. So it's quite good training. So why this data collection matters, why we collect this data, why it's important. It's important for a number of reasons. Treatment service planning is one of the big ones. So the NMDS data really collects information about what's happening in drug and alcohol treatment. It doesn't give us a complete picture about what's happening in terms of prevalence of use and that kind of thing, but it certainly gives a really good snapshot of what's happening in the world of drug and alcohol treatment in particular. So it helps us to helps the Commonwealth to plan services. It helps to inform funding and resourcing, where funds should be put, where resources should be put. Of course, there's never enough funding and there's never enough resources to meet demand, but it does help to make some decisions about where and what kinds of things should be funded. It captures treatment trends, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a couple of slides as well, that we can look at what's happening within treatment, and it can help to inform all sorts of things from, where we need extra training for staff or for our workforce. It can inform where trends might be emerging, where it can inform our research agenda, where there might be more research needed into a particular drug or a particular method or approach for treatment, that kind of thing. It also can help us a little bit with media reporting, particularly some of the negative media reporting that we see out there. All of the peaks in all of the states are often approached for comment on certain issues that arise or certain incidents that happen. And sometimes having good data about what's actually happening within drug and alcohol treatment can help us push back on some of that negative agenda and some of the stigma that's out there. So, having really good data about what people are seeing in their treatment services can help us do that as well. Okay. So what is the NMDS? It's an annual collection of data. It captures all closed episodes of treatment. So we'll talk again a bit about what that means. From all publicly funded government and non-government drug and alcohol specialist treatment services. It collects data over a number of different domains, which are kind of listed there. I'm going to go into each one of those and have a look. The links, so what I've done throughout this presentation is I'll share the slides with everyone who's attended. So once you get these slides, these links will be clickable for you. I've also put QR codes that link to things. So if you're watching this at a later date on a recording, you can pause the recording and use the QR code. But all of this information is available in what is kind of termed the Bible of the NMDS, and that's the data collection manual. So this data collection manual is put out every year. It doesn't always have significant changes every year. I believe the 24-25 version didn't have any changes from the previous year, but that talks about all the kind of detailed information about each one of these data domains that you need to know about collecting them. So I guess this is going to be a very quick overview of some of the information within that data collection manual. But if you're responsible for collecting NMDS data in your organisation, the data collection manual is a really good place to start, because it'll give you a little bit more detail than we're able to go to in the seminar, and it will probably answer some of the little sticky questions that sort of come up along the way. So can't stress enough, data collection manual is the place to go for answers, and it does get released every 12 months, re-released and updated every 12 months. So it's important to make sure that you've got the most recent version, and that link there, when it is clickable, will take you to that. I might even actually, how can I do this? Actually, maybe at the end of the presentation, I'll pop that link in the chat so you can have a look at the manual straight away. So this is just an example snapshot of data that's come out of the NMDS, just to give you an idea of the kinds of trends that it helps track. This is a little snapshot of a decade's worth of data related to closed episodes for people seeking treatment for their own drug use, where amphetamines were a drug of concern. And this length of data was from 2007 to 2017. So it's about a decade of data. It's exactly a decade of data, actually. And just looking at this graph quickly, we can see quite obviously that there was quite a trend within that decade. And it actually represents kind of a doubling of episodes for amphetamine overall between 2007 and 2017. So that then tells us that there's something changing, that there's something shifting, and that might require more research. Is it because there's a whole lot more people using methamphetamine, or has there been a change in the methamphetamine being used? Has there been a change in availability? What we know now is that a whole lot of people shifted towards using crystal methamphetamine, which increased harm around amphetamine use. So all of these things kind of play themselves out within the treatment space, and we can see that fairly clearly. It also shows, it's a little bit harder to see because the numbers are quite small, but in places like Tasmania and the Northern Territory, we actually had around a 10-fold increase for people accessing treatment for amphetamines in this space. And so that tells us that in those particular jurisdictions, something's really happening that's concerning. So it informs things like where we need to go for harm reduction, where we need to go for workforce development, all those sorts of things. So this is just one little piece of data, but it kind of gives you an idea of the kinds of things that we can track using the AIHW data. Okay, so for the purposes of this data collection, there's a very specific definition of who is a client, who we need to collect this data for. So clients are included when they are assessed by an agency or otherwise accepted for treatment, so onboarded as a client, for either their own drug use or another person's drug use. So the NMDS can capture data on, parents, friends, loved ones, people who are seeking support because of another person's drug use. From an in-scope agency, so that's a publicly funded, non-government or government drug and alcohol treatment service, and that they're aged 10 or older at the beginning of their treatment. So it doesn't cover anyone younger than 10, but older than 10 at the beginning of their treatment. And so the data domains are all assigned a code in the manual. So when you download that data collection manual, you'll see a number of codes for each of those domains, and we'll go into each of them and talk about how they're collected. But just as an example, this is information for an imaginary client whose main language is English, who were born in Australia, and the drug they're seeking help for is methamphetamine. So each of those domains has a code. So the code for English is 1201, the code for Australia is 1101, and the code for methamphetamine is 3103. So just to say that everything's assigned a code, your service may have ways of managing that. So you might have a system that when you're inputting data, there's just kind of a drop down and you choose English or you choose Australia, and you don't need to know what each of those codes are. But occasionally we come across a client from a place we haven't seen before, or uses a language that we might not have come across, and I'll show you how to kind of access those codes in those unique situations. So the other important thing to know is that the base information, or the base data unit for the NMDS is episodes, not clients. So it counts treatment episodes, and we'll talk about what constitutes an episode. But just as an example, you can see on the screen, we've got a bit of a visual representation of 3 clients. So the person on the left in the green shirt has accessed your service for withdrawal management and detox, and then he's moved into residential rehabilitation when that's finished. That's counted as 2 episodes because there's been a change in the main treatment type. And so counted as 2 episodes for that person. In the middle, we've got a client who accessed some withdrawal management and detox, then went on to receive counselling from a service, and then moved on to just kind of receiving some support and case management. And so that's 3 episodes for the one client. And then the person on the right in the red shirt accessed a service, completed an assessment, but then perhaps didn't continue on with any further service. So they did an assessment only. So 3 clients represented on the screen for a total of 6 episodes of care. Does that make sense? And we'll talk about when an episode needs to be closed and when a new one needs to be opened for a particular client. So as I mentioned, the basic unit of NMDS data is a closed treatment episode. So if you have clients that you're engaged with over the end of a financial year, so say as a client comes along in June, engages with your service, and they're still engaged in an open treatment episode in July or August, they are not counted in that financial year. If they're still open at the end of the financial year, they're not counted. They are counted in the following financial year when their treatment episode is closed. So a closed treatment episode has a period of client contact that has a defined start and an end date. So it will have a commencement date and a cessation date. It will have had no change in main treatment type, principal drug of concern, or also not on the slide, but treatment setting. So those 3 things, if they change at any point within the episode of care, then the episode of care needs to be closed and a new one opened. And it also has no unplanned break in contact for more than 3 months. So if a client has no contact with your service for a period of 3 months, then the treatment episode is closed and a new one starts. So you close an episode when, firstly, treatment might be completed. So a person's finished your program as it stands and then moves on to something else. So their episode is closed. If there's been no contact between the client and the provider for a period of 3 months, we know that clients sometimes disappear on us or disengage for other reasons. So if we've had no contact within 3 months, then the treatment episode is closed. Now, your organisation might have different policies around that, or it might have different processes around when a client is sort of discharged or when you finish with them. But for the purposes of the NMDS, if you haven't had any client contact within 3 months, then the treatment episode has to be closed. As I mentioned, if there's a change in the main treatment type, in the principal drug of concern or delivery setting, and we'll explore that a little bit more. But if there's a change in any of those 3 key things, then the treatment episode should be closed and a new one opened. Or if treatment is ceased, and it can be ceased for a whole range of reasons, and we'll also talk about that a bit further. Are there any questions at this point before I continue on? Nope. Awesome. Okay. So I thought what we do now is just have a look at some of the key elements of the NMDS. And we'll go into each of them. Some of them are a bit more straightforward than others. But this is kind of the area where we're really looking to get consistency about data collection. So we're really looking to try and reduce kind of some of that room for interpretation, which, there always is. We can't stamp that out entirely, but the more consistent we can make this data, the more useful it is. So the first one is the person's sex and date of birth. Important to notice that sex is a biological distinction from gender. So it's the sex that someone was assigned at birth. So the codes are 1 is for male, 2 is for female, 3 is another term, and 9 is for not stated. Now, obviously, there's some sensitivities and real limitations in these categories. Another term is sort of a catch-all for a lot of possibilities. So, I just kind of recognise that another term could potentially be seen as a little bit inadequate in terms of data collection, but that's what we're working with. So if they use another term, 3, or if they haven't stated or are not comfortable stating, then 9 is your code. The date of birth is recorded as a 6-digit code, with the first 2 digits being the day, the second 2 being the month, the last 4 being the year. If you don't know the person's date of birth, you can use the code 0101-1900, which indicates that you don't know the person's date of birth. However, there is room to estimate a person's date of birth, and using that kind of unknown is it's kind of nothing data. So when we look at that particular treatment episode, if there's an unknown 0101-1900, I don't know if that person was 12 or 65. So it's kind of like not very useful data to use that unknown. So you can actually estimate a person's date of birth if they're not, if they haven't given it to you or they're not willing to give it to you. And there is an element, another data element called an accuracy indicator, which we'll go into at the end of the presentation, that indicates that it is an estimation. But if you can have a guess, I think this client doesn't want to give me their date of birth, but I estimate they're around 40 years old. You give them a date of birth that is 0101, and then a year that puts them born around 40 years ago. Does that make sense? Probably better to estimate than to put unknown if you can avoid it. The next key element is around gender. Now, as opposed to biological sex assigned at birth, gender is the gender with which the person self-identifies. So the options here are 1 for man, boy or male, 2 for woman, girl or female, 3 for non-binary, 4 for a different term that people might identify with, 5 if they prefer not to answer the question, or 9 for not stated or inadequately described. Again, there's some sensitivities and some limitations kind of in these categories, but it's what we have to work with. Incidentally, this item in this current year that we're in is now mandatory. It's been not compulsory for the last couple of years. It wasn't in there at all before that, and the peaks really did some advocacy around collecting this information and you know that gender was distinct from sex and that it was important to collect that information. So we're really happy to see it included now. And now for this current year, it is mandatory, and that was, you know, to give services some time to make sure that they were asking that question as a part of their intake or assessment, so that they had that information going forward. So yeah, I think this is good. You know, we can debate about whether the categories are adequate or whether it should be a little bit more nuanced, but this is what we have to work with at the moment. Incidentally, if anyone's interested, NADA, who are the New South Wales Drug and Alcohol Peak, have produced a really good resource on working with LGBTIQ plus communities. And it does talk about kind of asking the question, good ways of asking the question of clients and ways of working with people. So it's a great resource to look up. So that's NADA, N-A-D-A. They are the New South Wales Drug and Alcohol Peak. So, and that resource is available on their website. So the next key element is around client type. We have 2 types of clients for the purposes of the NMDS: people receiving treatment for their own drug and alcohol use, or people who are receiving treatment for someone else's drug and alcohol use. So again, parents, friends, loved ones, partners, whatever it might be. If you were recording data for a client who is receiving treatment for another person's drug and alcohol use, you don't record a principal drug of concern, a method of use, or injecting status for that person. Yeah, that's the time when you leave those categories blank, is when someone's receiving treatment for another person's use. The next key element is the source of referral. So it asks about where the person was referred from rather, into your service. And so the categories there are self, family, friend, medical practitioner, a hospital, a mental health care service, another drug and alcohol service, another community or healthcare service, from correctional services, through a police diversion program, or through a court diversion program. So they, you know, kind of cover the gamut of where people are referred from. And so it's asking about that. Why have you got your hand up? Is that why you're waving at me? Yeah. You can turn on your mic if you've got a question. You just need to unmute yourself.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I want to ask this question relating to this. So an example, for example, if a client came into us and we did an assessment, so we'll record that would be 1 episode of assessment only.
If they didn't engage further. So if they only did the assessment and said, thank you, see you later, but didn't continue on, then yes, you would close their treatment episode and you would count it as assessment only.
Okay. So for example, if they came in for assessment and they said, yep, I'd like to go on to counselling or case management.
Yep.
So you wouldn't count that as 2 episodes because they've done the assessment and counselling.
Yeah, that's right. And we're not up to main treatment type yet, but when we go through that, I'll explain.
Right. Yep.
But because you're working with them over, you know, a period of time, let's say 2 or 3 months, providing counselling, the main treatment type is counselling. So within that episode, you probably did an assessment, you might have done a little bit of case management, but the main treatment type is counselling.
Right.
You can also record other treatment types, which kind of, you know, is the other things that you do with clients, but it does ask for a main treatment type. Yeah.
Thank you.
No worries. The next key element is the country of birth. So where the person was born, obviously. The link there will go to the Standard Australian Classification of Countries. This is just a little kind of screen grab of a little section of it. It is massive. It is, you know, every country you can imagine, allegedly every country in the world in the classification. Every country has a code. So a few of those codes there, you can see Australia is 1101. You can see that Samoa is 1505. You know, so there's a few there that, you know, Papua New Guinea, but yeah, it's extensive and all-encompassing. Most services that I've come across that I've talked NMDS with have kind of some way of you know, at your end of putting in information, you would have the codes for the most common ones that you find. So the communities that you most work with. And so you probably only need to access this document when you come across someone from a country that you don't normally come across, or you haven't come across before. Then that's where you find the code for countries. But you probably find within your service that there's a dozen or so countries that most of your clients are born in. Then it asks about a person's preferred language. So it's the language that they most prefer to communicate in. That includes sign language. And that's all those codes, once again, same, found in the Standard Classification of Languages. That's where that link will go. That's where that QR code goes. And yeah, there's just like a little screenshot of what that sort of looks like. Yeah, so you can see that the code for English is 1201, the code for French is 2101, etc. The next key element is Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander status. Again, asks whether a person identifies as being of Aboriginal origin and or Torres Strait Islander origin. So they're the codes there. So Aboriginal but not Torres Strait Islander, Torres Strait Islander but not Aboriginal, both Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, or neither, or not stated if they don't want to answer the question or you don't have that information. The next key element is around injecting drug use status. So it asks about the client's last use of injection as a method of administering their drugs. So the easiest way to ask that question is, when did you last used drugs intravenously, or when did you last inject? And the options there are 3 months ago or less, more than 3 months but less than 12 months, so sometime in the last year, more than 12 months ago, or they've never injected, or they've not stated. So not everyone uses drugs intravenously, but the answer to this question, the reason that we kind of isolate injecting drug use in particular, is because, as most of you would know, that when someone uses drugs intravenously, the potential for harm increases by quite a lot. And so it can inform things like harm reduction, things like workforce development, that kind of stuff, to know kind of what the population of injecting drug users sort of looks like, in terms of data. So that's why this question is asked specifically rather than in relation to any other methods. So then it does ask about method of use for your principal drug of concern. So whether they ingest, smoke, inject, sniff in terms of powder, or inhales, vapor, other, or not stated. Okay, then it asks a question about treatment setting. So this is the literal physical setting in which the treatment is provided. There's it's not many categories in this, they're fairly broad, but it basically makes the distinction between a non-residential facility or a residential facility. So if they're coming to you just for counselling, outpatient counselling, it's a non-residential facility. They're coming to your office or your building. Residential, obviously, where they're staying overnight. whether you're providing a service in their home or in another outreach setting. Or number 8 is for other. So that would include prisons, that would include anything that's not kind of covered under those. But most settings are covered under that sort of 1 to 4. And of course, it asks about principal drug of concern. Again, we have a standard classification of drugs of concern, which is enormous. And as you'll see, so again, that link will take you to the document if you feel like rummaging through it. But again, your data collection systems at a service level should have sort of the most common codes kind of readily available for you. As you can see, a lot of the drugs look at the active ingredient and then make a classification according to that. So as an example, you can see there's a whole lot of drugs in that screenshot that have the code 1101, which is the code for codeine. So if a person comes in and says, I'm really concerned because I'm using a lot of Panadeine Forte, for example, Panadeine Forte is listed under there, but it has the same code as codeine because codeine is the active, is the drug of concern that's in Panadeine Forte. So yeah, you can kind of rummage through and have a look at that. But look, for the purposes of the data collection, you just really need to know what that main drug is. And it might help you to have a look through if people kind of report using something that you've not heard of, then it can help to have a look through that. But at a service level, most of your systems will have something that will kind of readily collect the most common ones. And there's a few of them there: alcohol, 2100, cannabis 7101, etc. Okay, then it asks for a reason for cessation when you close a treatment episode. So there's a number of possible reasons that the NMDS collects. So the first one is treatment completed. They've finished, they've moved on, treatment is completed, so we're going to close the treatment episode. Number 2, 3, and 4 are the 3 that I mentioned at the beginning. So if there's a change in the main treatment type, if there's a change in delivery setting, or if there's a change in their principal drug of concern. So these are the ones that kind of get a bit tricky when you're looking at whether you're closing treatment episodes, because at the front end, the experience for the client isn't that you close them off and start again. So this is kind of happening behind the scenes in a data collection way, if that makes sense. Just trying to think of a good example. So if a person accesses your service, let's say you run a residential service, so they come in as a residential client, and then they go on to, they might leave the service, they might complete their treatment, but then they go on to access kind of counselling or some sort of aftercare that includes regular counselling visits to your service. Then, they've changed their main treatment type. So they've gone from a residential treatment type to a counselling treatment type. So you would close the treatment episode. They've also changed their delivery setting. So they were in a residential facility. They're now receiving counselling at an office or a non-residential facility. So the delivery setting has changed. The principal drug of concern probably hasn't changed. But the change in those other 2 elements means that there has to be a close of a treatment episode and the beginning of a new one, even though at the front end, as far as the client's concerned, they just continue on as a client of your service. But for the purposes of NMDS collection, there's a close in the treatment episode. Does that make sense? No questions about that?
I have a question. My name's Carissa. I work at SANDAS as a project officer, and I'm very interested in capturing the right data for our teams. So if a client, nearly completes a service with us, but they don't come to the last appointment, we wouldn't be marking that as treatment completed? I guess they have to come to the very last session and do the final ATOP to be considered treatment completed.
For the purposes of the NMDS is kind of silent on what treatment completed means. It's kind of what your service says that treatment completed means. So every model of care is different. So if your model of care is, you know, eight sessions over however many weeks or whatever, then so you can count that as sort of treatment completed. But the NMDS itself doesn't say what treatment completed is. It's kind of up to you to sort of define that. What they're mostly interested in is, you know, have they completed sort of a you know, a treatment program within your service? But it is a little bit open-ended in terms of what treatment completed means. Yeah, I suppose there's a difference between so if you look at number 6 or 7, for clients that just kind of decide they don't want to come anymore, say thanks but no thanks, I'm done, I'm not interested in doing your final ATOP or whatever it might be that you sort of do at the end, then you might count them as cease to participate against advice, or cease to participate without notice if they just kind of disappear, which we know that sometimes clients choose to do that or do that for whatever reason. So yeah, I guess they're just kind of looking at completion rates and what you consider as a completion. So that's I guess a question for your clinical team.
No, it makes sense to me actually with that explanation. Thank you.
Yep. No worries. Kyra or Kira?
Kira, thank you.
Kira.
I am another project officer with SANDAS as well. Just comparing this to the mental health MDS, just with regards to the need for an ATOP, say that we did mark something treatment concluded and it didn't have an ATOP marked end, would that mean that it would be it would flag as missing that last ATOP there? So yeah, how does that work?
Yeah, because so it would be your service, so SONDA, who would make the decision about requiring that final ATOP, or you know, for whoever needs to collect the ATOP. The NMDS is not interested in the ATOP, so that data that's collected from the ATOP doesn't go to NMDS. So, you know, for the purposes of this data set, it doesn't matter. It's really your kind of call on whether you think that the treatment is completed or not. For within your service and the, you know, the purposes of your model of care, and then how you might go on to provide service to that client, that's a decision for SONDA and your clinical team. So
amazing, thank you. That's clarified a lot for me.
Great, excellent. I noticed there's a few people from SONDA there too, so you might all connect afterwards and talk about you know, what happens within your service. Yeah, where did we get to? Okay, so 2, 3, and 4, if any of those things change. Hawaii, I can see you waving at me again. Do you want to ask a question? Are you muted still? You're still muted. Wow, we can't hear you.
Yeah, so for example, if I saw someone in the pre-release center, and then after that he got released in the community, so that meaning would I have to end because there's a change of delivery setting, and then he continued to see me at the office, and that would be like a new referral?
Yeah, so it depends on what's probably what you've done with them at the pre-release center. So if you've just kind of met with them and had a chat and say, hi, I'm Hwai, here's our service, if you want to connect outside, then let us know. Then that's not really counted as a client for the purposes of NMDS. So again, how you count that within your service is one thing, but for the NMDS, that wouldn't be counted. However, if you met with someone in the pre-release centre and you did an assessment with them and maybe saw them a couple of times, you know, for counselling or something like that, then for sure they're counted as a client. So when they're then released and then they start coming to see you at the office, or maybe you go to see them in their home or however you work, then yes, your main treatment delivery setting has changed because it was within the prison and now it's within now it's in the home or in the office. So, you know, at the front end with the client, nothing kind of changes for them. They don't, you know, but for the purpose for the NMDS, yeah, you would close a treatment episode and you would open a new one.
Yeah. But in terms of referral, meaning
what you would count as referral.
Yeah, so if they came back to see you, for me, that would be self-referred. So I'll put that as self-referred.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds good. I would count that because they're kind of making the decision to come and see you outside as well. Yeah. Unless they had to come see you as a condition of parole, then that's then that's a prison referral. So it's different. Yeah.
Thank you.
Cease to participate against advice, cease to participate without notice. Cease to participate involuntary is where a client has been asked to leave your service because they've breached a rule or there's been some behaviour issue or for some reason they've been asked not to continue. So that's an involuntary cessation. Cease to participate at expiation is for when someone is referred in for some kind of mandatory reason. So they're doing a drug diversion or a court diversion or probation and parole, and then they've then completed the requirements. So if the requirement is they attend 6 sessions with Debbie at SANDAS, and now they've ticked that off as a requirement, then they would cease to participate at expiation. So they've done their requirements, basically. Cease to participate by mutual agreement. They might not have completed their treatment. They've done a few sessions. They've decided it's not for them. You've had a chat about it. They've kind of cease to participate by mutual agreement. You might have referred them on elsewhere to a more appropriate service for whatever reason. So that's kind of mutual agreement. 11 is when there's been some kind of sanction by the drug court or a court diversion service. So they've broken a condition of their order, and then they've been imprisoned or had some kind of sanction. So that means that they need to stop working with you. 12 is that they've been imprisoned, so something not related to their work with you, but they've been caught for some other reason and have gone to prison. So they have ceased that engagement with you. Or 13, they've passed away, which sadly also happens in our sector occasionally. So they're all the reasons for cessation. Clicking on the wrong thing. There we go. The next key element is around main treatment type. So this is the main activity that the person is, the treatment that you're providing to the person. Withdrawal management or detox, counselling, rehabilitation, pharmacotherapy, support and case management, information and education, or assessment only. Now, as we know, with lots of our services, we do more than one thing with people. So it does ask you to define a main treatment type. So a person might be accessing counselling, but you also might be providing them with a bit of information and education, but largely it's counselling. So counselling is the main treatment type. You can also record secondary treatment types, but the main treatment type is kind of the reason. That's often defined by your funding. So if you've got funding to provide outpatient counselling, then the vast majority of your clients will be number 2 treatment type. You might have some that have an assessment only. You might have some people that just come to you, an assessment and a bit of information and education, but the vast majority of your clients then should be counselling clients. Does that make sense? Yeah. So again, if you're running a residential rehab, part of that residential program is likely to be counselling. So your main treatment type would be rehabilitation. You might record a second one as counselling. Unmute yourself first. You're still muted, Hoa.
For example, if we had to record the contacts, okay? So the contact, what do we do with each session? Like what type of contacts? So for example, if they came in as a main counselling for an episode, but at the beginning, the first contact was doing an assessment, and then maybe, you know, there's 3 or 4 sessions of contact to complete the assessment. You're thinking, how do we still count that as a separate contact in that episode? Can we do that?
No. So you would count it. So you're saying if a client comes to you and does an assessment, and they may take several sessions to complete the assessment, yep, and then they continue on and access for counselling, yeah. So you don't. The key thing to remember is, for the NMDS, you don't record data until you've closed the episode, right? So if the person came, they took 3 or 4 sessions to do an assessment, and then they went, thanks, but no thanks, you know, or you know, they just got some benefit out of doing the assessment and didn't want to continue, then you would close the episode and it would be assessment only. But if they continued on to, you know, did an assessment, doesn't matter if they took a few sessions, then did counselling, it would be 1 treatment episode with the main treatment type as counselling.
So that meaning in the contact for in each individual session appointment, you still have to put it as counselling, not assessment. No.
So in the NMDS, you don't count individual sessions. All you count is data collection. All you do is at a closed treatment episode doesn't record how many sessions it was. So a closed treatment episode could have 20 sessions, it could have 2 sessions. The NMDS doesn't collect that data. It's just interested in a treatment episode.
Right.
But does that make sense?
Yeah. But in the case if our funding require us to count the contact relating to assessment, would we count that as an assessment contact under that episode?
Yeah, so if you've got a funding body that's requiring you to count contacts and sessions, that's for that funding body. It's not for the NMDS.
Okay, so we have to find a way to extract that and then write it in the report and tell them, you know, even though they've got the counselling as a main episode, there's a portion at the front that's an assessment contact, and we need to let them. Okay.
Yeah, so for that particular treatment episode, what it would look like is, you know, client came to us for methamphetamine, here's all their data. The main treatment type was counselling. The secondary treatment types might have been assessment. Does that make sense? Yeah. Debbie?
I was just going to chime in here with that definitely, I think where people are getting confused here, Sam, is that there's contractual recording versus NMDS recording. So I think what you were referring to there, Hua, is the occasions of service that your contracting bodies are, similar to Kira and Carissa's questions. They're 2 separate entities. What our funding bodies ask for versus what AIHW ask for is separate. That's where a lot of our sector gets confused. They think it's one and the same.
Yeah, and because some services have systems that kind of collect it as one and the same. So as a clinician, you might be entering data, you know, for a particular client, and you might have a whiz-bang system that sort of extracts the NMDS, or it's almost automatic. You don't need to necessarily think about it. But for other services who need to collect it separately, which is a lot, by the way, I don't want to pretend everyone has whiz-bang systems, who have to collect it separately, you're exactly right, Debbie, that your funding body might ask for information about, you know, how many contacts, how many sessions, all of that. The NMDS is just interested in, for this client, how many treatment episodes did they have, and what was the main treatment type for those episodes. Does that make sense? It is tricky. It's definitely tricky. Thanks for that, Debbie. So the next key element is around the date accuracy indicator. So I talked before about collecting someone's date of birth and how we like to avoid using unknown if we can, and to make an estimation. So this is just kind of what that looks like. So for every date of birth, you have what's called an accuracy indicator. For each domain, the day, the month, the year, so each part of a person's date of birth, they can either be accurate, estimated, or unknown. So 3 quick examples there. just aware of the time. Client A was born on the 4th of October 1983. So the date of birth is recorded as 0410 1983. The data accuracy for that would be AAA, because they've told us that's what their date of birth is. We've recorded that. As far as we know, that's accurate. Client B's date of birth isn't known. They've chosen not to give it to you, which clients do for all sorts of reasons. But you make an estimation that she's about 30. So you might record her date of birth as 0101 because you don't know her exact date of birth, and 1995, which would make her around 30. The data accuracy indicator for that is UUE, because the date is unknown, the month is unknown, and the year is an estimate, right? So it's what it says to the data collection at the other end is this is a guess about this person. Client C, date of birth, age unknown, recorded as 0101 1900. The data accuracy indicator is UU because all three domains are unknown. Then we also record the client postcode. This is the postcode of the most recent home address or accommodation location. So this can include anywhere that they've been staying most recently, even if they've been rough sleeping in a park, sleeping in the city, you have a postcode, a rough location. The usual accommodation type, there's a bunch of codes in the data collection manual that outline that and outline kind of all sorts of accommodation types there, but have a look in the data collection manual for those. And then it does ask for a suburb or a town or locality name, just as close as you can get in terms of accuracy. That's good. Sometimes people, particularly if they're rough sleeping, are a bit vague about where their kind of accommodation has been, or if they've been staying with a number of friends or mates. That can be tricky, but just getting, you know, as accurate as you possibly can is good. So the last element we're going to look at is the SLK, or the statistical linkage key. So every client is allocated an SLK. It's a client identifier code that has information embedded in it that is unique to each client, or likely to be unique to each client, that's relatively stable across the client's lifetime, and is fairly reliably reported by clients to different service when they go to different services. It's not fail-safe. Of course, clients give different information to different services all the time. They might change their name. So, you know, it's not 100%, but as close as possible, it gives us the ability to look at client journeys, to track, you know, the number of episodes of care, or, you know, the principal drug of concern, without actually identifying the client, without actually having a name or, you know, attached. But it just has some, you know, information around there. So the components of the SLK, probably the easiest way to explain it is with the example that's there in the blue box. So the first three X's are the second, third, and fifth letters of the person's surname. The second two X's are made from the second and third letters of their given name. The date of birth, again, recorded as you did before. I've just noticed actually that there's an error in the blue box. That should have 4 Ys in there, not 3 Ys. And the last one is the sex. 1 is for male, 2 for female, 3 for other, and 9 not stated. So, you know, in the example, we've got a client called Rebecca Stanson with her date of birth, who is female, and that's the SLK that it spits out at the bottom. It really doesn't identify her in particular. You know, looking at that, I wouldn't necessarily be able to extract a name or identification from that. So that's how you pull together SLK. There is that clickable link will be to a guide, a fairly good 2-page guide about how to compose the SLK for a client. Yeah. And that's kind of the end of what I wanted to talk about. That did take a little bit longer than I thought, but happy to answer any questions or to talk about sticking points where you might be coming, you know, running into in terms of your own service provision. on the screen there is the link to the QNADA online training, which is pretty basically sort of what we went through today, but it also has some case studies at the end. So you can kind of practice. It'll give you a case study and you can kind of practice about what you would record, how many when you would close a treatment episode, all that sort of stuff. Again, as I mentioned, each service has different ways of collecting this data, different mechanics, different systems. So if you've got questions about how that actually works within your service, then it's good to talk to a manager or you know, whoever's kind of in charge of how that works. If you're a service who's just kind of embarking on this journey or starting to collect NMDS data and you've got some kind of detailed questions about that, I'm really happy to talk offline. If you want to give me a call. I'm not the expert in this stuff, but you know, I've got a lot of connections with people who know a lot more about this than me, that I can certainly, if there's questions I can't answer, happy to take them on notice and track down some information for you. But that data collection guide will give you you know, we'll answer most of the tricky questions. Just trying to find that link again. There's the QR code for the data collection manual. It's quite a thick document. It goes into each one of those elements in more detail than what I've kind of briefly been able to give today. And you know, if you're like, oh, I'm not quite sure how I need to code this or what I need to record for this client, flicking to that element in the data collection manual will help. There is more information there than I'm able to do in a little 1 hour snapshot. So with that said, are there any questions or opinions or discussion? No. Awesome. Oh, you're all NMDS experts. I love it. Thanks for sticking with us. It's a bit of a dry topic. It's not very exciting. It's one of those things that has to be done. But you know, we do feel really strongly that even though data collection is hardly anyone's favourite thing, you know, it is really important in terms of treatment planning and advocacy and our sort of work. So yeah, again, if you have any questions or want to talk further in detail about anything, then I'm really happy to have a chat offline if you want to email or give me a call. So last call for any question or comment. Michael, I notice you're online there too. Is there anything you wanted to add? No, maybe not. He might be on the
No. I just had to find my
mute button.
Mute. Hello, everybody. I am here. So, no, there isn't anything. I did, my ears did pick up when Debbie was talking about the difference between PHN contractual data and AIHW data. And we are trying to get at a national level some clarification about what happens with that kind of stuff, because it seems a lot of people are double collecting or double reporting data, which is avoided in some other jurisdictions.
Yeah, awesome, thanks. I noticed, Aris, you had your hand up a second.
Hi there, Sam. So I'm kind of hesitating to ask because I'm not sure if it's already answered. I guess for the history of injecting drug use, if the main substance of concern is, say, alcohol, never had any history with all of the injecting drugs, was it still necessary for us to ask and still collect it?
Yeah, it's still
Okay, cool.
necessary to ask. The answer might be never injected, but they also may have an injecting history, and that's good to know just in terms of harm reduction and risk and that kind of thing. So yeah, they still want you to ask that question, even if the primary drug of concern is something that's not injected. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Just wanted to clarify. I know Debbie answered this already.
Yep, no, good question. Yep,
thank you.
That is a good question.
Thank you.
Yeah. Excellent. All right, well, I'll let you all go. Thank you so much. And as I say, get in touch if you want to sort of talk further. And yeah, we will share the link to this once we've got it up on the website, and feel free to share it with colleagues or to access the QNADA online training, which you can just do at your own pace. Excellent. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Sam.
No
Thanks.
worries. Bye.